Welcome to the February 20th, 2025 episode of The Energy Show. I'm energy journalist Markham Hislop, and I'm joined by our show producer, MC Breadner.
Hi, everyone.
Today, we're going to talk about energy and Mark Carney, who is the one of the leadership hopefuls for the Liberal Party to succeed Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He's announced his resignation. We'll see the election in March, and we might even see a federal election shortly thereafter. That'll be his call as to when Canadians go to the polls. But today, his campaign released a press release that contained some comments about energy, and so that's what we're going to address, as well as we're starting to get some reaction down from the United States on what the impact will be on of Donald Trump's tariffs on oil, which would be so far they're set at 10%. They might go up, who knows? But at 10%, refiners are beginning to talk about what the impact will be on their operations. And that is very interesting information for Canada. So today we're going to have death. I hope it's not death by PowerPoint. It's going to be information by PowerPoint. But MC, if you could bring the presentation up, please, the slides. We've got a lot of data and information for you today. I want to start off with a framework within which to have this conversation. And the quote on the left is from Kevin Byrne, S&P Global Energy Economist. We had him on the show a couple of weeks ago talking about the U.S. market and the Canadian oil supply. And here's what he said, and I think this is really important. Canada probably needs to think strategically a little bit harder. What's in its strategic interest and what can it control and what's important for preserving the benefits of these resources for Canadians? Now, the question becomes, what does thinking strategically look like? And I over on the right-hand side of this slide is the strategy that the European Union came up with shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine, and then it was shutting off all of the gas to Europe, which was about 40% of the gas that they used. Here's what they did. Russia invades in February. In May, 3 months later, the EU comes out with Repower EU, and it has three components. In the short term, they had to find a replacement for Russian gas. They had to find something. So what they did is they bought LNG. They drove the price up. They sucked a lot of supply that would have normally gone into Asia, went into Europe, and that's how they got through the first 6 to 12 months of the crisis. Secondly, they were going to increase the pace at which they were shifting to clean energy technologies like wind and solar. Much more rapid expansion. And thirdly, they were going to invest in efficiency improvements so that they actually use less energy to do the same amount of work. Now, this strategy, depending on who you talk to, is a kind of a mixed bag. They've had some problems. Germany has lost industry because of high energy prices. The UK has seen some volatility in its electricity and gas markets. It's not perfect, but given the magnitude of the challenge here, I would argue that in fact it's not worked out too badly, and it could work out better as the strategy progresses, into 2026, 2027. We'll see. The point is, that's a strategy. What Canada does is not a strategy. What we do historically is muddle through. And a lot of that is driven by the fact that we're a confederation where we don't have a strong federal government. We have more of a cooperative federalism where the provinces have a lot of power. And as Alberta Premier Danielle Smith never tires of reminding us, provinces have the constitutional responsibility for developing natural resources, including energy. And that hamstrings the federal government. And so what you get are essentially what Mark Carney released today. So, MC, if we could get the next slide. So Carney's approach to this, and I have to admit, I find it attractive. It's better than what we've had before. It's kind of let's build. Let's put our shoulder to the wheel and start building infrastructure and industries, and that's much better than what we've had in the past, at least in the past, say 4 or 5 years. So here's what he said in the press release. Canada's major investment opportunities include The enormous opportunities to expand and modernize our energy infrastructure so that we are less dependent both on foreign suppliers and the United States as our main customer. Now, we've dealt with the United States as our main customer in previous episodes, but I'll sum it up for you here. The Canadian and U.S. oil and gas, and to a large extent, the electricity systems are tightly integrated, and it was designed that way over the last 40, 50 years. Canada exports 5 million barrels a day of oil to the U.S. Most of that, the majority goes to the Midwest region around Chicago and Detroit. And about 3.2 million barrels a day is this ultra heavy sour crude that are produced in the Alberta oil sands. That system it works very well for what it was designed for, and you don't change it overnight. If you were going to respond to that, it's very difficult to build the large scale infrastructure to change the flow of oil exports from north to south and then make it east and west. That's a very difficult. The estimate for building a new pipeline, even if the federal government, facilitated it and reduced red tape and did all the things that it's been talking about, would still be probably a minimum of 5 years. And we've seen them take up to 10 years. So there is no way that there is a short-term solution here. So that's on the United States as a customer. Let's talk about foreign suppliers, because I was really surprised to see that in this comment. So MC, if we can go to the next slide, please. Canadian crude oil imports. And we hear this all the time from Alberta. Oh my God, we're importing, dictator oil. That's the favorite. We're importing it into Eastern Canada. Why are we supporting dictatorships and authoritarian regimes around the world instead of supporting, our Western Canadian producers? Well, that's not where it comes from. If you look at that chart, and this is a Canadian Energy Regulator chart, I just pulled it off the website this morning. In 2024, we imported about 490,000 barrels a day, and 72.5% of it came from the U.S. That's the dark blue bar on that graph, and that's been the case for the better part of a decade. That the U.S. has been our main supply of imported oil, and in fact, if you look on there, the Saudi Arabia is down around like 12%, and Nigeria, we import more from Nigeria than we do from Saudi Arabia. So it's important to remember who are our suppliers? Well, because of this tight integration between the U.S. and Canada, in the case of crude oil imports, it's the United States. Okay, next slide, please. Canadian natural gas imports and exports. The light blue is the exports, and the gray are the imports. And again, it's the same kind of it's almost like a 10-to-1 ratio. Whatever we produce in Canada, we import about 1/10 of that to satisfy our needs, and it's usually because our energy is produced mostly in the West, and our big demand centers are in Eastern Canada, in Ontario and Quebec. So there we go. I mean, we're producing about 17 billion cubic feet a day of natural gas, and we're exporting about 9 billion last year of cubic feet a day, and maybe 1 billion cubic feet a day. That's what we're importing. So on hydrocarbons, we are massive exporters and minuscule importers. And there's not a lot, we don't have a lot of leverage here. It's not like we can get oil and natural gas from Alberta or Saskatchewan out to Ontario and Quebec quickly. The only way we could move oil would be a rail car, and that's expensive, and it might not be economic at all. That's why we don't do it. So it's very difficult. Okay, so let's have the next one. The next slide, please. This I pulled off the U.S. Energy Information Administration's website. And this is their graph of the electricity trade between Canada and the U.S. Now, on the bottom, in the tan bar is Canada, and the top is the blue is the United States. And you can see for since 2018, we've been they net exporters, they're net importers, and only in 2024, late 2023, when we had problems with water supply into some of the hydro dams, because we're 60% of our electricity comes from hydropower generation, mostly in BC, Manitoba, Quebec, and then to some extent in Newfoundland, Labrador. Um, so we are again on the electricity side, we're massive exporters as a rule. And I would imagine that as we get over the drought that caused the problems, that will again, once again become a very large scale exporter. And there's a very large, I forget the name of the transmission line that will be going into service. I think it's this year between Quebec and the northern seaboard of the U.S., which will show up and make this even more dramatic than it has been to a point. So the point is, these three graphs show that on energy, including electricity, Canada is a major exporter. We are a minor, very minor importer. And changing that relationship is extremely difficult. Okay, next slide, please. Now, this is interesting. So we're starting to get some comments and earnings calls that have been reported. This one is from a Bloomberg News story, and it is about Marathon Petroleum's earning calls, which were done on Tuesday, 2 days ago. And the CEO, Marianne Manon, talked about who's going to bear the cost of the Trump tariffs. And the majority of the cost, in her opinion, will ultimately be borne by the producer and then, frankly, to a lesser extent, the consumer. Now, that's contrary to what we've heard from economists who said that in every case, whenever the U.S. puts tariffs on, consumers always wind up paying 100%. But Marathon's a big player. They're the nation's largest refiner. They have six. If we could go to the next slide, please. I think I've got the data there. They process 1 million barrels a day of the 4 million barrels a day of oil that we export into the US. They have six Midwestern refineries. And what she says is, I would say a light switch, which means they're switching from heavy crude that we produce to light crude, which the Americans produce in abundance. They're the largest oil producers in the world. And she said we could do it, and we believe it would have minimal impact. And they say they can source U.S. light sweet crude from Bakken, which is in North Dakota, the Rocky Mountains, and then the Utica and Marcellus in the Northeast U.S. That's a major problem because if they can do that, and if they go ahead with it, where does that 1 million barrels a day of production go? Because Canada simply does not have the infrastructure to move 1 million barrels a day east and west. Now, there's been a news story that came out last week that the Trans Mountain system, because the Trans Mountain expansion added to the old Trans Mountain pipeline. Now you've got 890,000 barrels a day of shipping capacity. That can be increased 200,000 barrels a day to 300,000 barrels a day by using agents that reduce friction within the pipeline. Optimization, it's called. So let's say that suddenly now we've got an extra 300,000 barrels a day. We'll be really generous. What do we do with the remaining 700,000 barrels a day? What do we do with the expected 600,000 barrels a day of new supply from the oil sands that's supposed to come on stream by 2030? Now, just before we came on the air, I was on Twitter, and Heather Exner Poirot from the Macdonald Laurier Institute had posted a story where an vice president from Cenovus Energy, one of the big oil sands companies, was saying, "Oh no, we expect that we'll get our heavy crude over to the West Coast, and there's be lots of demand for it." Well, my response was, really? Okay, if the taxpayer is going to be called upon to pay to help this in any way to subsidize or build infrastructure, then I want to see the math. I want to see the math. I think it's time that Canadians stopped just writing blank checks in cases like this. Is that there's transparency and there's accountability, and we don't go and spend, tens of billions of dollars without having a business case that experts can, economists can pore over, people within the industry can look at and say, yes, this makes sense, or no, it doesn't make sense. Because not only on top of all of this, and this is the thing, Carney doesn't mention it explicitly, nobody else talks about it. We're staring down the barrel of an energy transition, a global energy transition. The International Energy Agency and many other agencies, S&P Global, Bloomberg NEF, Rystad from Norway, are all forecasting peak oil demand by 2030 and peak oil and natural gas oil demand either in 2030 or shortly thereafter. So, what we're doing is we're talking about building infrastructure that will, even in the best case scenario, comes on stream just as peak oil demand, arrives.
It's happening. Yeah.
So, the when we, Kevin Byrne was talking about we need a strategic approach. We're doing the opposite. We're doing exactly what the industry in Alberta and Saskatchewan have wanted for years. And in a port in the storm, instead of taking a breath, having some conversations, and coming up with a strategic approach, the way the EU did when it was faced with a very serious threat from Russia, we just glom on to whatever ideas or as someone we know said, the liberals are flailing around looking for ideas, and they'll take whatever they can get that and I think that it's essentially I'm underwhelmed by Carney's comments on energy here. So let's go to the next slide. This is very interesting. So Matthew Lucy is the CEO of PBF Energy. It's one of the big U.S. Midwest refiners. Here's what he says. If they don't sell it to the U.S., it's going to stay in the ground. The tariffs would cause a sizable disruption and have some impact on throughput. So basically what he's saying is probably their refinery would produce 10% maybe more less refined products as a result of these tariffs. Well, if you take supply out of the market, well, demand remains the same, prices are going to go up. And if there's anything we know about the US consumer is they're very sensitive to increases in the price of gasoline because they drive a lot and they drive big SUVs and pickup trucks. So how this is all going to work, he thinks the Canadian producers are going to just have to curtail production. And on top of that, the tariffs are going to have a sizable disruption in the industry. Now, here's something. This is almost comical. Reading the reports of the industry, and we don't know we don't know how the tariffs are going to be applied. We don't know who's going to be collecting them. We don't know who is ultimately going to pay. Is it the producer in Canada? Is it the refiner in the Midwest? Is it the consumer? Is it somebody else? I mean, or is it going to be shared? I mean, it's absolute chaos down there. And this is kind of the way Trump runs government, right? I mean, we've seen this lately with Elon Musk and his little band of 20-year-old coders going in and just wreaking havoc in the American computing system. So Trump sits in the Oval Office and he signs these executive orders, and he just doesn't care how it gets implemented.
Implemented. Mm-hmm.
And in fact, his administration is destroying the capacity of the government to implement his executive orders, as this illustrates.
Yeah.
Who's going to apply the tariffs? Who's going to collect the revenue? Who's going to check to make sure that the tariffs are being adhered to? On and on and on. I mean, it's just chaos south of the border as everybody tries to figure this out. Okay, next slide, please. Just before we went on air, this is how quickly this is changing. Just before we went on air, the Conference Board of Canada, which is based out of Ottawa, sent out an economic impact analysis of the Trump tariffs by province. And this includes not just the oil and gas. I mean, for each province, apparently Alberta beef would be significantly affected. And there are other exports other than energy that from other provinces that would be affected. But look at, where is the biggest impact it's on to oil producing provinces. Alberta's about 1.4%, Saskatchewan's 1.4%, Newfoundland is right in that area. But, the provinces that are the least affected, which are in the Maritimes, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, just simply don't have a much of an export-oriented economy, or less so than other provinces. So the this is kind of what we're expecting in the and then here's the lesson I want to draw, or the point I want to make. The impact of Trump's tariff is going to be felt in the very short term. The Conference Board of Canada is saying that the this reduction will be in the second quarter. So that starts April 1st and goes to the end of June. Our response to it on the energy side, the only response we really have or have thought of so far, is to build infrastructure to take our exports east and west and through the coast, so they go to, in the case of oil and gas. Caller. My point here is that the impact is going to be quick. Our response to it is going to be long term before we see any impact of it, and yet we're not considering that question at all. Now, MC, as part of your work with the show, you go and you look at various social media accounts to see what people are saying. Is are we is my point correct from your point of view? Where people just aren't talking about this?
I mean, I think it depends on what circles you're talking about. I think people are not even aware exactly of how it's going to impact them still. I think people are still trapped in the chaos, and I'm not sure. I haven't seen this. I'm seeing this for the first time like everybody else is. So this is pretty interesting to me. Um, I think that this will probably have people pretty nervous looking at these numbers and just seeing that we're looking at big changes in the economy.
Yes, and here's the other thing: is we don't even know that when next month comes around, and the I guess it would be March 1st. Uh, we don't even know if in fact Trump it will go ahead with the tariffs. You'll remember that the
Yeah,
last time, February 1st, there was supposed to be 25% tariffs across the board. And then he carved out oil and gas, and was going to apply only a 10%. And then when you looked at his executive order, it didn't include electricity in
right.
definition of energy, which makes perfect sense because if you reduced any of the electricity that flowed into the Northeast, for example, from Quebec, it would be a crisis. I mean, it's the
Yeah,
middle of winter there, and people could die. And
yeah,
so they didn't say anything about it. They just cleverly didn't include it. And so I think we can assume that electricity will be exempted from the tariffs. So does that give anybody confidence that in fact when March 1st rolls around, that Trump will proceed as he promised he would? Because he breaks his promises all the time. You can't believe anything he says. What are people are what are how are people responding to that idea that I don't know, will Trump
well,
will Trump do it or won't he?
yeah, I mean, it's less than 10 days away, right? So I guess for part of it is, you saw American senators and congressmen go on Fox News talking about what they gained in that negotiation that Trump and Trudeau had last time, which I mean, I'm still not even clear what was really negotiated there, other than we got this 30-day reprieve. So I mean, is there going to be a negotiation, and what is Trump asking for from Canada in that negotiation? Can he spin another win on March 1st to say, okay, I'm going to give them another 30 days, or we're not going to do the tariffs, or we're going to do less, or, I don't, we're not, he has been, he said a lot of things, but what is he actually after? And is he just going to try to put pressure on Trudeau again to give up something? and what is Trudeau going to give up? I mean, it's a lot to play out in the next 10 days.
Mhm. And this is the thing. I think it's fair to say it was true in Trump under Trump 1.0, but it's even more true under Trump 2.0 is that he creates chaos and then he manages the chaos. And he knows what he wants out of it, which apparently is us to become the 51st state. But nevertheless, it's chaos all the time, which I would argue actually increases the need for Canada to be strategic about this and
Yeah,
not to be reactive. And I would have to say, Trudeau's concession, as it were, to Trump to spend $1.3 billion on extra border security to try to keep fentanyl, the 19 kilograms of fentanyl that went into the U.S. last year, to keep that out, and illegal immigrants who aren't going across. We're going to, but and essentially it had already been announced. Uh, so anyway, whatever. But we, instead of reacting to everything, we should be responding. I mean, we should be strategic about
yes.
this. And we should be having a national conversation about these kinds of things. And maybe if you could just put the PowerPoint back up.
Oh, yeah, we've got one more here. Sorry about that.
This also came from the Mark Carney press release. To build more competitive manufacturing and services sector, Canada must invest to become a clean energy superpower in nuclear, hydropower, wind, hydrogen, battery storage, and carbon capture. So there's a whole lot of stuff that jumps out at me. But you know what the biggest one is, MC? This is exactly the status. This is not the status quo. This is reflects the conversation that's been going on in Canada for at least 5 years. There's
Yeah,
nothing new here. Absolutely nothing. The closest you could come to saying that there's something new is this business about building more competitive manufacturing and service sectors. What the US did under Biden, what the EU did, what China has done for the last 20 years is they invest enormous amounts of sums of money in building the manufacturing for clean energy technologies, the solar panels, the wind turbines, the batteries, the EVs, the heat pumps, the electrolyzers. So they subsidize the manufacturing on that side. Then they subsidize the deployment of that technology in the economy for consumers to buy them. And then over time, as these things scale up, they cut back on the subsidies. So you could look at that and say, I think I can infer from that comment that investing in nuclear, we're going to develop again on nuclear industry here in Canada. In hydropower, we'll build new hydro dams and develop that expertise. Same with wind and hydrogen. But that we've been we've been talking about this stuff for a long time. For instance, hydrogen. 2, 3 years ago, I had hydrogen critics like Michael Lieberg, former owner of Bloomberg NEF, say to me, we shouldn't be putting any public money at all into hydrogen because it's not a winner. And everybody at that time was hyped up about what a huge role provide 30% of global primary energy by 2050. And I said, look, we need to go through this and figure out what the use cases are for hydrogen. Can we use it in long haul trucking? Can we use it in transit for
yeah,
buses? Can we use it? Where does it make sense? Where does it not make sense? And I think my view of this was borne out because in the last, we've learned the city of Edmonton's transit experiment didn't work out. They've abandoned hydrogen. We've seen elsewhere, we've seen, hydrogen trucking companies go bankrupt. Batteries are pushing hydrogen out of this space over and over. The number of use cases for hydrogen is shrinking, not
yeah,
expanding. And that's what we needed to know.
yeah,
We needed to know where it would work and where it wouldn't work. Why would you put hydrogen in this unless you were thinking like we were in 2022, and then battery storage and then carbon capture?
yeah.
You
Carbon
know,
capture screams at me, but yeah,
exactly. So all this is a reflection of the status quo. There's no grand strategy here. There's no innovative thinking. There's nothing like the strategic approach that the Repower EU has taken. Even China at its last plenum last year, sorry, the third plenum, where they do their every year they do, sorry, every 5 years they do an economic plan. They were far more strategic about what they want. They said they're going to be three things: solar, EVs, and batteries. And we're going to rule the world. We're going to dominate the manufacture of those three things. And that's going to fuel our economy and our rise as a geopolitical superpower. So this is just underwhelming, is my point.
Well,
And
I think his new slogan there, spend less, invest more. I mean, I I like it. I mean, I guess it's kind of catchy, but here you're talking about competitive manufacturing and service sectors, like competitive with who and where and manufacturing what? What service sectors is he referring to? Um, so I guess for me is it does sound like it sounds nice, but I agree with you. It is, you know, basically the status quo. And I would just like to know more about what he's talking about. Like what type of manufacturing do you want to create? Where is that going to be? Um, I just want more information. I don't feel like this really says a lot, to be honest.
and in fairness to Mark Carney, usually during leadership campaigns, you don't say a lot.
That's true.
Right. You generally don't talk about detailed policies. We saw in Alberta, not, last year, Naheed Nenshi won the Alberta leadership, and during his campaign, he notoriously said nothing. And he really said nothing about energy policy, and
Yeah.
very deliberately. He didn't want to be, pigeonholed or to commit himself ahead of becoming leader and he did win. But the problem is, this is not a normal situation. Carney is going to be, if
Yeah.
Carney wins, and he's the leader now, I think he's the heir presumptive. It looks like he's going to win. So if he
Yeah.
does in March, he will become prime minister, and he will immediately be confronted with a crisis that created by Trump. So we don't have a lot of time for the normal process to play out. We need ideas now. We need to be rallying around a strategy, just like Repower EU, but the Canadian version of it. We need to be smart about it, just like Canadian Kevin Burns said. More strategic approach. And that's why we're criticizing Carney, is because we're in a crisis, and this is kind of not crisis worthy, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I would tend to agree. I mean, I do like this idea. I mean, it's got, he's coming from his background, spend less, invest more, like sounds great. Um, and it looks great on his podium. And he's got some really great tweets about it. But I guess for me, I would like to, I do want to invest in Canadians and it's workers and it's manufacturing sectors. But as we've talked a lot about on the show, like we don't want to invest in stranded assets, if that's what we're talking about, you know. So I mean, we really need to be clear here. And if you're a big pipeline supporter, you might hear invest more and you think, yes, invest in pipelines. So I think the details are really important. Even if they're a little vague, we could use a few details here.
Yeah, I agree. And there doesn't seem to be anybody else that is kind of holding his feet to the fire. Everybody, and this is true of anybody who's saying this. We're in a crisis, and I get it. Rally round, Team Canada, got rah rah rah. But somebody's got to say, hang on a second, we're spending taxpayer dollars here. And we have to make sure that even in a crisis, we're being smart, we're being strategic, we're getting the best bang for the buck. I mean, the federal government bought the Trans Mountain Expansion project in 2019 for $5.7 billion. The cost of the Trans Mountain Expansion pipeline to finish it was $34 billion.
Yeah.
Do we want to get ourselves into situations, and not just with uh, an oil pipeline, could be anything, any kind of infrastructure. Do we want to be dumb about it and just throw money at it to try to prove? No. Let's take a beat, have the conversations, bring in the experts, mull these questions over a little bit and be more strategic than we have been. That's and frankly, again, to be kind to Carney, it's not like Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservatives, or Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP. They're worse, in my opinion. They stay away from policy, and their party policies are not great. So Carney is the leading light on this in the country. And he's, former bank governor of the Bank of Canada, former bank governor of the Bank of England. He's certainly got the chops, but we should hold him accountable to a higher standard. Is our so
Well, I think he is a smart guy. I mean, one thing I will give him is he worked during Brexit, and they had major trade issues. We're facing major trade issues right now with Trump. So I mean, some of that experience has got to be worth something. So I will give him credit. He's a smart guy,
yeah.
but I need to do a lot more than I want to be able to judge that for myself. I'm not just gonna back somebody that doesn't have a plan or is making a plan to plan, I guess.
Canada has slogan has been our political conversation has been dominated by slogans. Axe the tax, the campaign to get rid of the consumer carbon tax for too long. And given the magnitude of the crisis, we can't manage it with slogans. We need more than that. We need meat on the bones, and we haven't got it here. So on that, we'll leave this poor dead horse and we'll stop beating it, and we'll see how this all plays out. MC, thank you very much, viewers. We want your comments by text and by email. So, MC, if you want to provide those, please.
Sure, it's you can text us at 587-330-5757, or you can send us an email at theenergyshow with an I at gmail.com.
Great. We'll see you tomorrow.
Take care, everyone.